সুপ্রিয় দর্শক, বিরতির পর আপনাদের সবাইকে আবারও স্বাগতম কমিউনিটি ম্যাটার্সে। আজকে আমরা কথা বলছি ডোমেস্টিক ভায়োলেন্স অ্যান্ড ইটস ইম্প্যাক্ট অন ফ্যামিলি লাইফ। আমার সাথে উপস্থিত আছেন আমার হাতের ডান পাশে ব্যারিস্টার আয়েশা মিয়া, থ্যাংক ইউ ফর জয়নিং আস টুডে। আমার হাতের বাম পাশে উপস্থিত আছেন জনাব Masood Ahmed. Thank you very much, Masood Bhai, for joining us today. Today we are talking about domestic violence and its impact on family life. আমরা ফার্স্ট সেগমেন্টে কথা বলছিলাম facts and figure গুলো নিয়ে. What are the facts and figures? And then also at the same time we touched a little bit about impact of domestic violence on family life. This segment will try to focus on impact of domestic violence on children's growth, children's development. আমি যদি প্রথমে আপনাকে দিয়ে শুরু করি মাসুদ ভাই, if you can tell us, you've been involved with community for quite a long time in different portfolio. If you can tell us the impact of domestic violence in a on children's growth in general, if they witness their parents, they are fighting each other all the time, or even if they are victim of domestic violence or abuse within their house, what is the impact of that in their growth?
I think the biggest one is very easy to understand if we want to understand, and that is emotionally it troubles children so much. They may be smiling in front of you, they may be pretending to be happy, but actually behind the scene they know everything that's going on. If you are arguing between yourselves, if you are fighting between yourselves, if you are behaving in a controlling manner, undermining your partner, whoever it is, men controlling women or women sometimes controlling men, these things, they have a ugly way of showing themselves, and unfortunately if you have children around you, then they suffer the most. They usually suffer in silence, so emotionally they have a big problem, and sometimes some of these kind of behaviors also become normalized, so when they grow up they have a very negative attitude towards family life. Sometimes many families would want their children to grow up and get married and have children and all that. They may not be interested in family life. Education অনেক সময় surprisingly and sometimes children become very focused. Sometimes they become very focused because it becomes a coping mechanism. So they actually do very well academically, but still emotionally in the long run you will see some difficulties. Cognitively, psychologically they have difficulties which needs to be addressed. So anybody witnessing abuse, anybody witnessing domestic violence and things like that, they really, in my opinion, they need support, they need help, they need psychological help, they need counseling, and they need to find a way of talking this through and realizing that this is not normal, this is not acceptable, this is not the way to be, and it's perfectly okay for you to have decent, healthy family life as you wish to go along.
This is very important for sustainable human development of any children.
Of course, every time there is abuse coming, and you see what happens, I have noticed in our community, in the Bangladeshi community, and it's not just even Bangladeshi, South Asian communities, many parents, and particularly mothers, when they don't speak up, they don't challenge, and they're unable to often challenge their abuser, usually it may be their partner, husband, whoever, then they bottle it in, and when you bottle too much things in, then what happens is that you need to find a way of getting that out, and sometimes that goes out or it comes out in an abusive behavior towards the children, and that's also not good. So you really need to stamp it out when it happens. I know it's easier said than done, I know it's not easy, but you have to realize that each one of you, whatever your circumstances, you are greater than your circumstances. You are better than the abuse and intolerance and all this harm that's coming your way. You have to find a way, you have to find a way of strengthening yourself. You have to listen to positive things, listen to motivational things, go to seminars, circles, whatever you can, or at least listen to positive programs. Unfortunately, sometimes people who become at the receiving end of a lot of this abuse, they're also isolated. They are shut off from the wider community. They don't go to the community center. They don't go to the mosque. They don't go to various meetings. They don't even have access to TV and radio and things like that. So they're living in a very isolated, sheltered life, and they think that they're just on their own. And that's what happens, and it kind of increases their abuse and vulnerability. And I really wish you well. But all I want to say is that part of my message is, believe in yourself and realize that you're not dependent on anybody. If they're going to treat you with respect, whoever it is, that's fine. You can give respect back. But if you think that by challenging, by standing up, you are going to lose everything, that's not the case.
That's not true.
The whole society,
Absolutely.
the country where we live, in the United Kingdom, the whole society is geared up to supporting vulnerable people. So don't be afraid to go to the police. I know they get things wrong sometimes. Go to the police, go to social services, talk to someone.
There are people around.
Talk to someone and ask for help. And you will find there will be help.
Thank you very much. Masood Bhai was emphasizing on how domestic violence can have significant negative impact on children's growth.
Yes.
So would you be able to tell us from your perspective, you are an expert in family and civil law, would you be able to tell us what's the impact of domestic violence?
If I give you the most basic example, when you go through an incident of stress, your body releases the hormone cortisol. When children live in a household with their parents continuously at each other's throats, or they witness violence, it releases that very same hormone, cortisol, in the body. Cortisol, historically, as our bodies developed, is a fight or flight hormone. There's a young child, let's say 5 years old, who is witnessing aggression. It doesn't need to be punches, shouting, hostility. You can cut the environment with a knife. That cortisol builds up. And studies have shown it affects development. So a child who's flooded with cortisol, their brain will not develop as it should. So it develops in a haphazard way. So our brains, we have so many internal connections. But a child who is witnessing abuse, a child who is seeing things children shouldn't see, it stunts their emotional and cognitive development. So they grow up thinking things are normal, these things are normal.
But it is not actually.
So for a girl, if she witnesses her mother being abused, she will, to a certain extent, not all the time, be more accommodating and perhaps even seek out men as she grows up who are abusive. With boys, and this is a very tragic story, there's generational abuse. So when I was working as an independent domestic violence advisor, I worked in one of the central London local authorities. I noticed that when an older woman's been abused by her husband, many years later, when her sons grow up, they start abusing her too. So the same pushing and shoving, the demeaning way of referring to her, treating her as a domestic slave, just not giving her any value. So not only does it hamper their emotional... It
became a common practice within the family.
Yes. So a son will copy, to a large extent, his father. When they experience domestic abuse in the home, it always, in my opinion, comes out in the classroom. So a child who is seeing abusive behavioral patterns at home will act out in the classroom. So younger children...
In a violent way.
Yes, so they won't know how to share. That aggression needs to come out. That build-up needs to find its escape. So
and they use classroom as
yes,
as
and
a field.
playground. And it's really unfortunate, especially the boys. Especially the boys.
And then it's not just that women, they face domestic violence. It's also men.
Yes.
1 in 6 men face domestic violence as well. And then you mentioned about particularly children. They are reacting they are trying to react that domestic violence they have faced in their home, in the
Yes.
classroom,
Yes.
or in playground,
Mm.
which, I mean, that means they have a suffocating environment within their house. They
Yes.
cannot talk, they cannot share their frustration, and they, in many case scenario, they start getting involved with all those antisocial behavior. They started going out with bad company. Don't you think that leads to further problems?
Yes, essentially, a child forms emotional attachments.
Hmm.
They form emotional attachments with their parents, their
Hmm.
mother, their father, and their siblings. In an abusive environment, those emotional attachments are either not formed or they're formed in a detrimental way.
Hmm.
So, for example, if a child sees, let's say, the father abusing the mother, some children will say to their mother, if you don't do as I say, I'm going to go and tell dad.
Mhm.
So that emotional bond, which should be one of comfort and nurture, becomes
Mm.
abusive. In time, when those emotional attachments aren't formed correctly, when they grow up, because they don't have the bonds at home, they go out and seek the bonds elsewhere.
Outside, yeah.
So it forces children out of the home.
Mm.
Essentially, as human beings, we want comfort, we want peace. If we don't get it at home, we'll go out into society to look
Mm.
for that.
Mhm.
And society will provide really bad friends. So
Mhm.
essentially, the parents, if they aren't unified and they are creating a toxic environment, they'll be driving their children out of the home.
Mhm. Definitely, definitely. Masood bhai, what do you think of this? Do you think that children, once they are facing some sort of suffocating environment within their house, they face domestic abuse, violence every day, there is big possibility that they can get involved with antisocial behavior, and they can get involved with some bad company if they do
Yeah,
not have
yeah,
the
yeah.
right sort of platform in the
I
house.
think if the home is not meeting their needs, then they will look for somewhere else to get those needs met. And usually, like Aisha has said, you know, emotional comfort. People need security. They need to feel safe and secure in their own home. If they don't get that love, if they don't have that bond and attachment within their key people in the home, they will go elsewhere and they'll be hanging around. They'll be involved in gangs and violence. And as you know, another campaign I'm involved with is the knife crime.
Mhm.
We're seeing a lot of young people getting involved in violent and abusive behavior in the community, and this is just not acceptable. So they need to be nurtured in a way.
Do you think it happened because they didn't have right sort of environment within their house? They didn't have the right sort of education.
Well, it can be
Parents that did not invest their time.
it can be a number of things. I don't want to point fingers at parents, because all our parents are growing up or bringing up children in difficult circumstances.
Definitely.
So I can't, but many a times what we see is that parental neglect, lack of supervision, lack of support, lack of motivation, all of that contributes to children going out of line, yeah, and finding their comfort in something else, which is usually destructive. You know, if they turn to alcohol, there's a huge increase in young people, especially boys, some girls as well, from the Bangladeshi Asian community, turning to alcohol abuse. They're turning to substance misuse, so drugs and all that kind of stuff. And the inevitable result of all that is that they get involved in criminal activities. Half the time they don't know what they're doing, and other times they are just trying to feed their habit. So they need money, they need to steal, they need to rob, they need to break in. Yeah. So it creates a vicious cycle. And what I'm trying to do through some of my work is to break that cycle.
We need to go for a break. We'll listen more from you. সুপ্রিয় দর্শক, আজকে আমরা কথা বলছি ডোমেস্টিক ভায়োলেন্স এন্ড ইটস ইমপ্যাক্ট অন ফ্যামিলি লাইফ। আমরা যাব একটা বিরতিতে, আমাদের সাথেই থাকবেন।